But in terms of like remote work as the new normal, it's a long list of people coming in at the moment, 60-70% of them going, I just don't want to work from home anymore. So I think there's probably light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of co-working spaces.
Welcome to the Going Global podcast, brought to you by Globalization Partners. Hire anyone, anywhere, quickly and easily. Use our AI-driven, automated, fully compliant global employer of record platform, powered by our in-house worldwide HR experts with 97% customer satisfaction ratings. Globalization Partners. Succeed faster.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Going Global, the podcast where leaders of high-growth companies tell us their own stories of going global and building global remote teams. I'm your host, Diego Mendiburu, and remember that you can find all episodes of this show on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. On today's show, we're going to interview Henry Weaver, head of community of Fishburners, Australia's largest non-for-profit startup organization. Fishburners is dedicated to the success of its startups by providing the best resources, education, mentoring, and community of like-minded people to connect with and learn from. Fishburners hosts more than 2,000 startup entities who have been part of the operation since it opened. Hello, Henry, and welcome to Going Global.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Henry, let's go back in time. Fishburners was founded in 2011, right? So,
Yeah.
How much has the Australian startup scene changed in these years? And what kind of companies or industries have been transformed the most or have flourished the most there?
Well, I mean, interestingly, when we started back in April 2011, the ecosystem was almost sort of non-existent. I think there was a few sort of co-working spaces, probably one that I can think of. But in terms of like Fishburners being the first tech co-working space, yeah, that was us. So we started in April 2011. Two guys founded it. Mike Casey, who's the founder of Grad Connection, which recently sold to Seek a couple of years ago. And then Pete Davison, who was one of the first seed investors in PayPal, got together in a pub in Ultimo, introvert and extrovert. They hit it off, and the rest is kind of history. But you got to remember, when Mike was looking for cheap office space for his startup in Sydney 11 years ago, he couldn't find anything. So that's why essentially Fishburners was born, and it was really born out of the let's build a community, let's get early stage tech product platforms together, get a critical mass and get them involved together so they can, learn off each other and start growing. And that's really the sort of early sort of stage sort of start of the organization. Since then, look, we filled that building over a sort of 5-year period with 133 startups, 330 members, teams of 1 to teams of 15, had plenty of success stories coming through. So some of our biggest ones were Koala Mattresses, Car Next Door, Mad Paws, Premonition. So we've had some consumer-facing companies come through, and we've had some obviously B2B companies come through as well. But in terms of like types of industry, look, industry agnostic, tech agnostic. It was really just trying to get a bunch of people coming in that were building tech product platform and try and get them together so they can all grow.
So let's talk about something that is very important and I believe something crucial for an organization such as Fishburners, which is the community. So from what I understand, in order to have a strong entrepreneurship ecosystem, you need, of course, investors willing to put their money to take the risk of supporting entrepreneurs that, of course, have to put the ideas and build successful teams and launch products. But then we have the community, which is this network of contacts that can give support to entrepreneurs, have mentorship sessions with them, and all kinds of connections that can help them grow and be successful, right?
Yeah, I mean, co-working spaces have always have a value add, and that's just people, right? Most people come into Fishburners because they're, at the moment, sick of working from home and they're looking for increased accountability, increased feedback. Back then, it was really about community-based review. It's like, okay, I have this problem. There's probably going to be someone in Fishburners that is 6 months ahead of me and can basically help me sort that problem quicker. And that was really the crux of why we got a lot of people coming in. We were very upfront about what Fishburners was good at and what Fishburners wasn't good at. We weren't really concerned about, being the most flashes of desk spaces, but, WeWork didn't exist in Australia at that point, so we kind of didn't have that barometer. From our point of view, it's just about getting like-minded people together, having it relative. So rather than, coming in and there's someone who's about to IPO, learning from someone who's about to IPO, we wanted people that were sort of 6 months down the line, either one way or the other. So they could skills could go up and down that that ladder. And that was really the focus of early stage Fishburners, I think, which was really good.
Tell us, how has the ecosystem evolved in terms of how many startups have already pursued international expansion? I mean, do you have several examples of startups that have already gone through the process and become this, like the reference of how an Australian startup should go global, and now they are, giving that best practices back to the community?
Well, I mean, you've got the two Hail Mary shots that Australia have had, and Atlassian and Canva, and obviously they've led from the front in terms of how they've gone about it, but they're not overnight successes. And I mean, they've been first to probably tell you that a lot of hard work's gone into it. But they're the two companies that, if you're not in Australia, and you've probably heard of those companies, they're the unicorns that we have at the moment. You probably add safety culture into that conversation as well now. But from an Australian point of view, like the market isn't big enough here to just stay in Australia. If you're looking at, true, globalization and growth, like you can't just think about staying in Australia because the market's not big enough. There's 24 million people, 25 million people now. I used to say that there were more kangaroos than people. I don't know if that's still true, but it's probably not far off. But from a day one, a founder, rightly or wrongly, is probably looking at how they, look past Australia as a market. They're either looking at, probably back then it was very much, okay, how do I get to America? How do I get to San Francisco? I think that's changing. We're seeing that sentiment change. We're seeing more Australian startups focus on Asia. I think that's an interesting sort of change over the last 11, 12 years of being in the ecosystem. But from my point of view, like, we work with early stage startups where we want them to get it right. I think if they're building their MVP and they're doing it in Australia, this is a really good test market for them to, try out. Good supply and demand levels. You've got a really high education base. And you've got people that are willing and have the disposable cash that actually want to, try new things. So I think that kind of makeup makes Australia a good market, but it has a really low ceiling. And that's where most founders probably, get a little bit hoodwinked by the fact that, you've got to go global from day one. But I'd much prefer people to be actually perfecting what they're doing here, actually get, the right sort of programs in place, the right processes in place so they can actually scale and then move globally. And that's where we're seeing some companies do that well now in terms of Koala Mattresses have opened up offices across the world, in San Francisco, and we're seeing a number of companies more recently where we've got plant-based meat company. They've been going for the last 2 years. They're called V2 Foods. They've raised a lot of money on home soil, but they've just done another round of $77 million, which is going to lead their expansion into China. So I think that's, as the ecosystem gets older and gets better, and we start having second, third, fourth generations of founders, we're going to see probably a quicker process of globalization and actually getting out of the market. Whereas back 10, 11 years ago, it was, okay, there wasn't that many people to learn from, people to talk to, people to sort of engage with, right?
I'm really interested in hearing more about what you just said about, at the beginning, having startups looking more to the US as a market for expansion. And I guess it's obvious why, it's such a big market and sharing the same language. But you mentioned that now there are many other startups focusing on Asia. So why is that? What changed, or what information or data have they discovered that has made Asia also quite an attractive market for global expansion for Australian startups?
There's probably a number of reasons, but off the top of my head, you're looking at like 2/3 of the world being in one place. Like that kind of makes sense. I think then you've got emerging markets where the middle class, if it grows by 1%, basically overtakes the US as an overall market to look at. So I think the opportunity there is huge for a lot of companies. And so if you're a B2C startup or any startup really, or a company that has a product that sells into an emerging market, I think they're a market that hasn't been attained yet. I'm looking at the likes of like the middle class in India. That's about to double. So there's huge opportunities in this part of the world. And to be honest, it's on your doorstep. And that's something that I think is underrated, that we are part of Asia Pacific.
Yeah, totally. So from your experience at Fishburners, what are the biggest challenges of Australian startups when planning and executing their international expansion plans? What's the things that are more challenging for them right away?
Most of the time, they're just not ready for it. Categorically, just not ready for it. And I think they probably need to work out, okay, how do I actually, get as a corner market here? I think that's probably the biggest sort of bit of feedback that we're sort of giving at the moment. And, perfect your processes, actually understand, I have a consumer set in Australia. How do I actually get to that consumer set in Australia? Globally, the bigger opportunities are overseas. So I think that always basically, I've used the word hoodwink, but yeah, it kind of is like they look at the opportunity and go, okay, I'm going to make more money if I go and try this in the US. Either that kills the startup very quickly, or they ride that opportunity. They meet the right people at the right time. There's that thing of luck, meeting the right person at the right time and being able to jump on that person and try and ride that trail. But yeah, there's an element of I'd much rather we start really focusing on, building out companies here that, are then able to actually, when they do make the move to the US or to Asia or to Europe, they can actually take advantage of that.
How do you know that? For me, probably that's the biggest question as a former entrepreneur too. It's like, with all the experience you have working at Fishburners, what is the metric or that, factor that you suddenly realize one startup has already achieved that would, make you recommend them, okay, this is now time for international expansion? What would be that element that all successful startups have and share that has made their international expansion possible or doable?
It's right time, right place. Like that's, unfortunately, I could say I'd be a very rich man if I turned around and said, okay, well, it is this one thing that's going to lead your expansion into all markets and you're going to global domination. Like it just doesn't work that way. So I think it's the right time, right place, being able to be smart enough as a founder to maximize the opportunities that land in front of you. And if that's taking you overseas from Australia, then great, take advantage of those. But I've met plenty of people that have started businesses in Australia, got a little bit of traction, and then migrate straight to the US, but never come back. So I think there's an element of luck and an element of right time, right place, and being able to maximize the opportunity that's in front of you.
You mentioned that Australia is a great test market. Why is that? What conditions make Australia a good place to test one specific product or service?
Highly educated, high disposable income. We're constricted into sort of 5 major cities. Like that's the kind of perfect hotbed to try and get in front of people.
Yeah, I get it. And I'm wondering if Australians are good early adopters, if Australians are willing to experiment with new products and services from up and coming entrepreneurs.
I personally think so. I think they're very willing to put the money where their mouth is and try something new. But then you're probably, in Australia, there's probably, there's a saying, tall poppy syndrome. So you get a lot of people that, they're starting to rise. And we have this thing in Australia where you want to take the legs underneath them and they're getting too big for the boots and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's an interesting one. I think it depends what circles you're sort of focusing on and hanging around in and the industry that you're in. But I think it's, as a market in general, it's pretty good to really sort of get a consumer product out there and start being able to engage with your customers very quickly. And I think that's where, if you're building an MVP, you should be talking to your consumers all the time. You should be getting as much feedback as possible all the time. And Australia is a pretty good place to do that. I'd suggest there are a number of countries in the world that are a pretty good place to do that, but this is where I'm based, so I can see it.
One of the things that I believe it is more obvious about Fishburners is how much you value education, So it's a crucial element of your program and your support. So if you could pick one area of expertise that most entrepreneurs lack when starting their business, what would that be?
Well, I've actually got a lot of data on this, but my fundamental one thing for a founder is like, do they really want it enough? Like, I think everyone likes the idea of being self-employed, being a founder. Do they actually want to put the sweat and the tears into it? And I think that's not for everyone. I think there's probably an element of, like, you're kind of born with being an entrepreneur. And I think you're born with the mindset of, okay, I see a problem. How do I solve that problem? From a more fundamental point of view, like, I think we have issues here where we've got a lot of founders with ideas, but they can't find tech founders to build those ideas out. That's always a struggle. So if someone solved that, that'd be perfect. But I think it's it's an interesting conversation, I think. But there's that real confidence thing, I think, in Australia. And in some ways, we're a really confident country and confident sort of society. So I think from our point of view, it's just making sure that we capitalize on.
I'm wondering, what kind of educational materials do you give to entrepreneurs in Fishburners so they can better understand the challenges of international expansion? Or maybe is it just, like special events or connections with former entrepreneurs, with mentors, or what kind of resources do you give startups so they can better tackle international expansion?
So Fishburners does a lot of events, right? And we do a lot of workshops, do a lot of programmatic content. And that's really driven from our Founders Hub membership that we have that's open to a lot of people. In terms of how we operate it and look at it, you have like the catch-all, which is our workshops that we run every Thursday. We then have our sort of more targeted, specific content where, we'll get 10, 15 founders in a boardroom like this and essentially focus on a specific industry topic, be it, Facebook 101s through to exit strategy, through to, raising money in Asia, raising money in the US or something like that. And they're a pretty consistent, like once or twice a week, we're running events of that sort of nature. Then you've got a really specific, like individual, like I need to be talking to someone who's been there, done that, and I need to be getting advice off them. And that's where our mentorship program comes in. And we've got like 60, 70 mentors at the moment that are involved in the space. And again, it's anything from accounting 101s through to Facebook 101s through to, UX, UI design. So I think there's a lot of learning and development that Fishburner members get access to. And it's just about them really opening themselves up to make use of it. That's half the battle. With globalization, what I like doing there is getting the founders that have done it back in to really talk about that process. Because I personally think with globalization, there isn't a one size fits all.
Totally.
Like it's a very unique journey for that startup. It's a very unique way of doing it and where they've come from and why they're doing it. It could be a different sort of reason. So I think there's what I like doing with some of sort of the later stage companies is getting, the CEOs and founders of those companies to come in and actually engage with some of our more high growth companies.
Yeah.
And I think that is much better than, getting it from a book. I find that. I mean, everyone should read Lean Startup, but that's been around for years. So
Totally. I mean, there's nothing like learning from other people's mistakes or anecdotes, and that really puts you in their shoes. And that's the way, probably more probably that you will avoid doing the same mistake if you hear it from someone.
I mentioned it again earlier. It's like that who luck of meeting someone, realizing that is a potential inflection point for your startup. Like someone's termed it who luck, and that makes sense, right? It's jumping on someone who, is going to be the person that helps you or opens up a door. And as a founder, you've got to sit there and go, okay, I'm making use of this opportunity that is in front of me. And that a lot of the time is the things that lead to expansion overseas, raising more money, opening up a door that gives you more revenue, like that sort of stuff.
So this is a weird question, but now that you mentioned this, I want to do it. I want to ask it. Do you think extroverts, being an extrovert is one thing that you must have if you're an entrepreneur? Or do you think that is more likely that startups with a team of extroverts will likely be more successful than a team of more introverts, maybe more focused on programming or technology, but not so willing to go outside and meet people and make these connections?
No, not at all. I think that's nothing to do with it. I think the idea that most people want would be to get a right balance of team in your founding team. And I think that's probably made up of, an extrovert and introvert, but you've really got to work out how do you like to be recharged? Like I'm probably an extrovert that recharges like an introvert. So make use of that, right? So I don't know if I buy into founders needing to be having, one being more extroverted versus being more introverted. I think a lot of the time it's like, have they got enough industry specific knowledge in that market to make use of it? Have they got the right people around in terms of, a tech person, a marketing person around them to create that? Or are they just learning it themselves and just trying to grow? Obviously, that's going to take a bit longer than if they had people that, have those skill sets around them. So, I think find balance when you do have that founding team and start building out a team culture. But as an extrovert isn't going to be more way inclined to be an entrepreneur, I don't think.
I agree. So, we have to talk about the pandemic. There's no way to avoid that topic. So how many of the startups in Fishburners right now have pivoted or changed their business plans or strategies due to the pandemic? But not only because of the pandemic itself and all the social distancing measures that came along, but especially in terms of how the world will look after we are done with the pandemic. That definitely has changed a lot of industries. So how many of the startups you're working with have completely changed their business models because of this?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like you look at the travel industry. I mean, you've got STA Global going under. I think what's the other one? Another major one. I forget the name. But like to be honest, in the last month and a half, I've met 5 founders that are all targeting the travel industry. So go figure, right? And I mean, the answer is because
the rebound.
It's a level playing field now.
Yeah,
there's an opportunity arise, and that's usually what happens out of a pandemic, a recession, or something like that. People will see the opportunity, and it's whether it's their ability to execute on that opportunity. So, I mean, the pandemic's been interesting. I think what I'm seeing more of is how startups do their business. I think that's an interesting one. We're seeing a hybrid of people being more in the office or less in the office. Some people can work from home, some people can't, and they need to be in an office environment. But in terms of specifics, like I look at, there's a startup in Australia called Camplify. It's basically it's how you book camping grounds in Australia and that sort of stuff. So if you want to, drive up the coast and stop at several different camping grounds, you would use this platform, right? He was probably really struggling before the pandemic because you're probably just looking at Airbnb or people going overseas or whatever. Now he's probably having a great time because everyone's looking to go camping. So I think it's been an interesting one from being in the right industry, being in the right industry that's been, there's a level playing field, there's an opportunity to take advantage of, and we've certainly seen that with some of the startups in Australia for sure.
And now the question, of course, is how do you see co-working spaces and incubators and accelerators changing again because of the pandemic, especially, the challenge of creating community, considering that remote work is now the new normal?
Yeah, well, I mean, when the height of the pandemic, most people said that co-working was dead. But then since people are back in the city, we've grown 5-10% a month. And I think that's probably to the good work of the Fishburners team in terms of, we did transition all of our events to virtual. So we tried to keep people engaged. We then gave 4 months free to all of our members so they could stay in part of the community. And, we delivered like weekly content and updates and basically tried to not stop. But in terms of remote work as the new normal, it's a long list of people coming in at the moment, 60-70% of them going, I just don't want to work from home anymore. So I think there's probably light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of co-working spaces. I think co-working spaces in Australia probably got big for their boots in terms of price points and their value add that they thought they had and all that sort of stuff. So I think there's been a good reset from that point of view, which probably makes co-working spaces in Australia a lot more affordable and really gets the people that are providing value add, are providing content, are providing actual education to the founders that are in it. They're the ones that are rising to the top, and they're the ones that are actually, actually have people in their space at the moment, which is, I'm safe to say, I'm pretty happy with where Fishburners is at this point.
No, that's very interesting, and I understand what you say. Maybe the new normal will be more a hybrid approach, and I was speaking to a remote work expert, and she mentioned something that it's similar to what you just said, that the younger population is the one more eager to returning to the office, to a proper working space, because they are tired of, sharing the same internet connection with the whole family, being interrupted, having their own personal space invaded by work. So you are right. I mean, it's not necessarily that you will be working from home all the time, but it is true that this whole pandemic has made us understand that it's possible to work anywhere in the world using, Zoom and your computer and your mobile device, making connections virtually and choosing if you want to work one day from home, one work in a co-working space, one day maybe you'll just want to work in somebody else's office and make other type of connections. I guess what you're saying is that you were able to adapt to the sudden social distancing measures that you probably had to apply because of the government rules. But now that things are, more similar to how they were before the pandemic, you'll see something of a mix, a more diverse way of working, right?
I mean, answer me this, like what happens to junior staff coming out of university? Like, how do you train them in a way that keeps them more included, gets them actually the right advice that they're looking for? I spoke to a Google engineer in Google Australia this week, and he said all the senior engineers are way more productive at home. But the learning gap for all of the junior engineers and the graduates coming in they're slower than they would be because they're not next to the senior engineers day in, day out. So I think this is actually a fundamental like culture thing. I don't know if it's the cities are dead. I don't think that's going to be, I don't think everyone's going to, in 10 years time, I think we'll be back to most people working in offices and engaging with people because people do need people. We're human, right? But the fundamental example of, senior devs being very, very, very productive at home versus junior devs taking a long time to get actually up to speed because they're not in the environment with the other devs. Like that's a pretty fundamental flaw for a graduate walking into a place like Google at this point.
And I also had a conversation with one of the partners of Business Incubator and Accelerator here in Mexico City, 500 Startups. They also have obviously a worldwide office. And one thing he said is that all this, a remote work thing and making Zoom conversations also helps making international connections a bit easier. It is important, obviously, for any accelerator and incubator to, make local connections so they can learn from each other. But it also has made probably easier, to, destroy the barriers and talking to people all over the world in a more accessible way because of the pandemic. Do you agree with that? I mean, it's easier for you to help your entrepreneurs to connect with people from all over the world now than it was 6 months or 1 year ago?
For sure. I think that's definitely, I think Zoom isn't like a last resort anymore. And I think probably before the pandemic, it probably was, most people had a preference of actually engaging with someone face to face. I mean, there are problems, there are good things about that. Like you can read body language, you can understand, okay, is this person engaging? Are we actually hitting it off as potential client, potential employees, whatever, right? Whereas I think it's probably quite hard to judge that. And I think very few people are very good at Zoom calls. Like I can definitely say that I'm not a Zoom person. I am much better face to face or whatever, over a phone, that kind of thing, right? So I think you've got to understand your limitations and you probably, the more you do it, the better you get at it. But I have a feeling most people are a little zoomed out. And that's where we got to with our At Home with Fishburners program is kind of people are like, okay, this has been great while I'm at home, but can we come back in now? Can we start doing a hybrid of events and all that sort of stuff?
So I have to ask you, Henry, you're an entrepreneur yourself, right? I mean, how do you mix your role as head of community of Fishburners with your own business and projects?
Badly. That's the truth, isn't it? Yeah, look, it's been, Fishburners has given me everything that I needed when I was 21 walking in there, 22. I trained I got a law degree. And then I went traveling and I'd worked in various sort of sales roles or whatever back in the UK, but then sort of came here and found Fishburners, and it kind of it's given me every opportunity that I needed it to give me. And hopefully I've given back in terms of, growing the place and making it what it is these days, having been here sort of 5-6 years. It's really hard being sort of full-time, part-time versus running your own startup, and it's long nights, it's early mornings. Like I was doing stuff at 10:30 at night last night and then woke up at 5 and did another 3 hours this morning, and then I've come to work here, and then I'm probably going to go back out to the startup this afternoon. So it's juggling, and that's always an issue and a problem. But yeah, I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it.
It is true that if you have someone that has, from his own experience, faced the challenges of being an entrepreneur, is very different than being in a business incubator or accelerator where you have people that have never started their own business, right? And so I guess you do have a lot to share with other entrepreneurs because of your own experience as an entrepreneur, right?
To be honest, it's one of my big bugbears of incubators, accelerators, and co-working spaces, not hiring people that have actually founded a business, because they don't know, and they won't know until they've actually started one and failed one and done quite well in one. And that's the hard truth. I'm not sure you can teach, if you don't know what it takes to actually really, really grind, and it's on your head and it all fails. And I think CEOs and managing directors have that pressure, but at early stage, like just starting something, like if you haven't done it, like it is a different world. It really is.
Totally. I agree with you. So last question, tell us more about the programs that Fishburners runs, but especially about FemmePowered.
Yeah, great. So it's taking female founder startups through a 6-month program, and hopefully trying to, increase their traction, increase their revenue, solidify an idea. Maybe they have come in with one idea, worked out that probably isn't the right thing to do, and then they pivoted to something that, was based off of feedback from customers and all that sort of stuff. So this is one of our probably our proudest moments this year, which is great. In the past, we've done a program through the pandemic, and it's been a hybrid. So it's taken 10 to 12 startups over. It's like a 6-month program in conjunction with Google for Startups, one of our main sponsors, and really sort of burning down and taking them through week-to-week programmatic content to try and grow their startup. So they're coming into the pandemic with a problem. We want them to leave with, a solution that, a bit of traction, maybe some funding. 2 of the startups have actually raised, which is great. So we deem that as a success, and several have gone. And it's really, it's a joy to watch them come in, engage with each other. And they've had that. The best thing about accelerators and incubators has always been the cohort mentality, and everyone sort of driving together. And we saw someone get married in the cohort, and it was really nice seeing what they were doing and all that sort of stuff. So, the programmatic content is always something that Fishburners really enjoys doing. And we've seen some good value add and seen some good sort of successes come out of the last program, which is something that we will take back and understand the feedback and understand, okay, what can we do better next time, and how do we make more successes out of it? And that's the key to it all, really.
Thank you very much, Henry. It was a fantastic conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. Cheers.
Thank you, Henry. Bye-bye. This is the end of today's show. I hope you enjoyed it, and remember that you can find past episodes on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you are planning to hire a new global team member, Globalization Partners makes it easy to onboard international talent in a matter of days. Go to globalization-partners.com to get started.
This is Going Global, presented by Globalization Partners.